I'm going to talk about food. Never has something been so important to the church, but so much get in the way of speaking. What kind of food are you thinking about now? Your roast not burning, is that a hint? It can be very real. It can be very real. And for some of us, breakfast was a long time ago, and we're ready. And some of the rest of us just can be thinking about food at any time. But food and the church have been intertwined almost in every way. In the Old Testament, the festivals all were built around food, and the sacrifices were around food, and the sacrifice wasn't wasted, and all of the things that went with that. Meals can be a special time. One of the things that I decry is the fact that in the generations that have followed me, most families have lost that ability that used to be to have that sacred time of being together. And there are lots of reasons for it. Everybody used to work 9 to 5, and now wow. Working is a lot different, and all of the things that go with it. Let me share a few stories from 25 years ago. Our daughter Stephanie was in first grade. And when we would sit down at her meal, she always had something to share. She's still that way, and she's in her early 30s, you know. But the stories would be, you know what I learned today at school? I can tell the difference between the identical twins. I figured out how to do it. Or, I have a new best friend. Everybody in that school was her best friend, but it usually only lasted a day or so. And Susan was a teacher specializing in early childhood reading, and she would say, I thought that one kid we were never going to get through to. And the light went on, and wow, I can't believe it. And I had loads of things that I could share, but they all seemed very insignificant. And some would say that those family stories were insignificant, but they weren't. They weren't because they were real to the part of the family that was sharing it. And in our eating and sharing together, we were learning more about each other, and there was nothing insignificant about that.
Amen.
To share those stories and to share those experiences. Meals can be special. I remember a special Thanksgiving in Marquette where I was pastoring. There was a student that came to church all the time, a long history in the Methodist church, and he had nowhere to go for Thanksgiving. And I said, we're going to have more turkey than you will be able to eat. Come on and spend Thanksgiving with us. And we spent 4 or 5 or 6 of the most delightful hours. I'll share only a little bit of it. John, I lose his name now, I think it was John. John grew up in Liberia. And when he was in his late teens, almost 20, he was a disc jockey for a radio station. And at this time, Liberia was in the midst of a civil war. And a group of the rebels came and took over the radio station. And he was locked in a room with a little window that was up about 7 feet high and was about this big. Now, he was a slender fellow. He sat in that room thinking, am I going to die? They have killed many, and am I going to die? He made a decision which probably saved his life. He pulled a chair over. He got up to that little window. He, as quietly as he could, dislodged it. He pushed it out. He jumped. He fell. He got up, and he ran for the jungle and made his way to a city, a small city, some 30 miles away. And there, he came into contact with an educator in Africa who was connected with an educator at Northern Michigan University. And they worked it out so if he could get to the next city, there was a visa waiting for him, and he was able to come to Marquette. Now, he came to Marquette the 1st of September. Got off the plane from Africa. 1st of September in Marquette is delightful. But not when you think a temperature of 100 is the normal, is the norm. He acclimated himself. He wore a parka when the temperature was in the 70s, when true Yoopers are wearing swimming suits. And I saw him every Sunday in church, and his family had been Methodist. We invited him for that Thanksgiving dinner. I'm not sure whether there was anybody else there with us. There may have been. And he shared that story. And he shared the story of all of the people that were involved in really saving his life. And you know, I never looked at refugees in the same way after that. It was a personal experience. Lost contact with him a number of years ago as he went on to do graduate school and all of that. But we thank God for the people that played a role in that, and for that meal, where before the meal I had a casual understanding. After the meal, I just wanted to sit at his feet and have him tell me more and more about what he had experienced. What happens when we share a meal? It can be so important. On the other end of the spectrum, I remember being a guest at a highfalutin retirement volunteer organization where someone was being named the Genesee County Volunteer of the Year. They were a member of the church, and the governor was coming to offer words of hope. After sitting next to the governor for 2.5 hours, I'd never vote for him again. Can't tell you all the stories, don't think it's political, but we shared time, but it didn't have the same impact. I've heard executives say you never hire someone for a significant position unless you share a meal with them. For when sharing the meal, you're getting beyond the rote answers and you're figuring something out. Meals can be important times. They can be times where we not only learn the facts of someone else's life, but we learn what makes them tick. And we could go on and on and on. Friendships are not only made at meals, but they are deepened. And we soon learn that we've got someone there we can trust and we can deal with. What would the church be if we didn't have food? Wow. We have food for most everything. That's why some say that Jesus must have been a Methodist. Because we have food. Although I pastored a Presbyterian church for a couple of years and they were just about as good at food. And I'm not talking about quality, but I'm talking about quality of relationship in those foods. Whether they're full-blown dinners or after-church punch and cookies, there is so much that happens in that. And whoever started that, which I would say started in the Old Testament festivals, was not only a great PR person, but was someone that knew how to get to the heart of others. Something very significant happens when we share a meal. I spent 5 years pastoring at Marquette First in the Upper Peninsula. That was a dynamic, growing church of about almost 300 on a Sunday morning, 500-600 members. But it was incredibly diverse, not so much culturally, although they would say it was culturally because the Finns and the Norwegians and the Swedes and the Cornish did not always get along real well. But the way we think of things, it might not have been that diverse, but it was diverse in the sense of how they looked at life. You had a number of people from the medical center, many physicians and professors at Northern Michigan. And then you had the townies. They may not have known how to operate on someone, but they knew how to get things done in town or to keep them from happening. How do you bring a group like that together? After my 4th year there, just before I left, I finally think I figured it out. They learned how to eat together. And they had relationships with each other. The very liberal with the very conservative, and every shade in between. One of the things they did was dinners for 8. They had 150 or more people involved in these. And I don't remember all the details, but the first house she would go to was for hors d'oeuvres, and there would be 40, 50 people there in a place that was pretty large. It was about 40, I think. And there were those in 4 different places. And strategically, the ones that when you signed up, you were assigned different places, so you get to meet people. In the hors d'oeuvre one, it was pretty casual conversation, but it was important. And then you moved to soup and salad. There were maybe 12 or 16, I think 16 people. And the conversations got a little bit better, and you got to know people. For a pastor, it was great because the conversations went over the whole gamut of what they were. And then you went to a dinner main course with 8 people. And longer time was scheduled there. And it was 8 people who would not have normally called each other up and said, let's go out to dinner. And there were some miracles of faith and grace that happened in that. As people who looked at things in a very different way were able to establish ties and relationships there. And then finally you would return to one of 4 or 5 places that had dessert, and there would be more conversation. And I contend that that church, for the 40 or 50 years before I got there and a few years after, it was those connections that didn't lessen the tension between the divisions that a lot of the people had, but it did lessen the anxiety and all that went with that. As the conversations were strong, but they were not uncivil, and they grew to know each other, to support each other, and to walk together in their life of faith. Think of the number of incidents where Jesus interacted with people and food was involved. I'm going to highlight just a few. When he turned the water into wine. Why did he do that? Because if you ran out of wine, especially wine of good quality, at a wedding feast, which was not just one day but multiple days, it would be a mark on that family that they did not plan well, didn't have the resources to do everything. And from my reading of that account, Jesus didn't stand up and say, hey, I'm going to turn the water into wine. He had them bring him out to the kitchen, the water. He said a few words, and he said, go pour the wine. And people began to say it's the best that we had. Food was a part of a relationship there, and Jesus was part of that. There was a miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. How did Jesus pull that off? Someday we'd like to know. There was Zacchaeus up in a tree. Jesus is walking through the village, and he sees Zacchaeus and says, Zacchaeus, you come down, I'm going to your house today. Wow. I've never had the courage to say, hey, we're going to go out to eat, but we're going to your house. I have brought friends home from fishing expedition and golf outings and said, oh, Susan won't care. She wouldn't have cared if I'd given her a little bit of time. I probably matured in that as the years passed on. But it was important. It was important. What happened when people ate with Jesus? The disciples, the followers of Jesus, the water carriers, they had a new understanding of Jesus. They saw what he was able to do, and they saw the compassion. What about the 5,000 who were fed? They forever would remember, here's a guy that cares not only about our soul, but cares about our stomachs and all that goes with it. And Zacchaeus. What happened with Zacchaeus? That dinner was powerful. If salespeople could catch that power of that, they would be wealthy, wealthy, wealthy. For by the end of the dinner, he had promised to give back money to those that he had stolen from, and he was a tax collector, and stealing from people was part of what he was all about. And there were the others that were there with him, seeing it. he recognized, as others did, that someone cared about him. He had made it in the world, the financial world, but he hadn't made it into polite society. For part of his life was taking advantage of people, and Zacchaeus now was a changed person. Why did that happen? Because when people had dinner with Jesus, strange things happened. They saw a person of integrity. They saw faith. They saw someone that believed in them and about them.
Amen.
Sinners that Jesus ate with got to see that Jesus was genuine, and many followed. And what about the Last Supper? If you read it very carefully, there's some uneasiness going on there. Why are you washing my feet? I'll wash your feet. No, Peter, you don't get what's going on. But let's not be too hard on Peter. Do you think any of the others got it? Maybe Judas came the close to getting it. Now, he rationalized that he was just trying to push Jesus to do what needed to be done, but that was not what happened. But those that ate with Jesus, in the days that followed Easter and in the weeks and the months, don't you think that that gave them a whole different perspective? As the story and as the experience, they began to realize that what Jesus was saying was true. Eating with Jesus was a special, special time. But then let's deal with that, one of my favorite passages on the road to Emmaus. The two followers of Jesus were not terribly distant acquaintances. We don't really know the whole story. But Jesus comes up behind them, and they begin to have a conversation. Now, some would say that what was going on, they were walking towards Emmaus, and the sun was out, and they didn't recognize it was Jesus. Well, some may swallow that. I'm not quite sure about it. But anyway, they didn't recognize Jesus. And they talked. And they talked about the political events of the day, and they said, we had hoped Jesus would be the one. And Jesus didn't say, aha, I'm the one. No. The conversations kept on and on and on. And they got to Emmaus. And Jesus says, well, I'm going to go on. And they said, oh no, you got to stay. You got to stay and have dinner. Come on, stay. And finally he says, oh, okay. And when did they recognize who he was? In the breaking of the bread. That says something about the power of eating together and being together. They saw Jesus in a brand new light when they ate together. Their eyes were open. Doesn't the same thing happen to us when we gather for a meal? A meal that is prepared for all of us? I would dare say that the friendship meals we have, that out of friends that we have established here in the church, or the church dinners, that something happens when we eat together. We become a little less agitated at some of the issues that agitate us. We see things from a little bit different perspective. We experience each other in a different way. The sacrament of Holy Communion is an opportunity to eat together and to see Jesus in a different light. To see Jesus in a new way. To see Jesus in a way of grace and peace and hope. Some of us come today to experience communion because we need the forgiveness that Jesus offers. Some of us come today because there are battles going on between parts of our brain and parts of our soul, and they are raging within, and we can't find answers or peace. And in the eating of a meal, there is a possibility of seeing Jesus in a different way. Some today are needing to be told it's going to be all right. No, that's not a get-out-of-jail-free card, but it's an acknowledgement that I need to be held in God's arms in a way that I wasn't before. Some today come needing their soul nourished. Because of life and experiences, they have not been eating very much, and certainly haven't been celebrating life when they have. And their soul is so hungry that it needs to nourish them. Others need encouragement, and life is beating them down. They need to see Jesus. We need to see Jesus in a new way. And that is what this meal is about. I would say in many ways that all of our gatherings where food is a part of it, they are holy meals. But the sacrament of Holy Communion is that special meal. Physically, it may not nourish us for the next couple of days, but the symbolism is very, very real. But spiritually, the reality of our eating together is so, so important. The table is prepared. I challenge all of us in this holy meal to experience the reality of Jesus the Christ in a new and fresh way. To God be the glory.
Amen.
I'm going to ask you to